There is a royal jewel that for more than 2 decades no one had heard of. It disappeared after the dazzling era of the 80s, and everyone thought it had been secretly sold to cover up scandals. But one day, quite recently, this jewel resurfaced, and its appearance became a sensation for everyone who follows the life of the British monarchy. It is the famous York tiara, in which Sarah Ferguson, the future Duchess of York, walked down the aisle in 1986. Her fate turned out not like that of a fairy tale princess. She did not inherit royal jewels by birthright. She was not surrounded by precious stones from childhood. And yet it was she who came to possess several of the most remarkable ornaments of the Windsor dynasty. Gifts from the Queen, relics of the Victorian era, and that very tiara whose story turned into a true mystery. Today, we will go step by step through her collection to understand how did an ordinary girl from London become the owner of unique royal treasures, and why did one of them vanish for so many years? But before we return to the mystery of the York tiara, let us look at the other jewels that accompanied the life of the Duchess of York. Each of them preserves not only the sparkle of stones, but an entire drama. Sarah Margaret Ferguson was born on October 15, 1959, in London, into the family of Major Ronald Ferguson and his wife Susan Mary Wright. A childhood that could have been peaceful turned out to be full of dramas. When the girl was only 12, her parents separated. Her mother went overseas to a new partner, leaving the children with her father. For Sarah, this became a deep scar. She was never able either to understand or to forgive this act. Her father, absorbed in work and sports, soon married again, but it was precisely his work that became for Sarah a door into a world she could hardly have dreamed of. Ronald Ferguson was Prince Charles's polo coach, and so young Sarah often found herself near the Queen's children, played with them, talked with them, and without realizing it, gradually became part of their circle. At 14, fate presented her with a new friend, Diana Spencer. Their friendship seemed accidental, but it was she who later played the decisive role in Sarah's destiny. Later, when Diana had already become Princess of Wales, it was she who would introduce Sarah into the close circle of the royal family. Thus, in the life of this red-haired tomboy, opened the road by which she would walk to the altar with Prince Andrew and to her first truly royal jewels. And if today we look at Sarah through the prism of her jewels, it is here that the path begins by which they came into her hands. On July 23, 1986, London turned into the scenery for a royal fairy tale. Crowds of people, hundreds of television cameras, and thousands of flashes, all for the wedding of Prince Andrew and his bride, Sarah Ferguson. But the main intrigue of that day was not only the marriage itself, but also the jewel that entered history as one of the Queen's most symbolic gestures. Before the eyes of millions of spectators, Sarah entered Westminster Abbey with a wreath of fresh white flowers atop her veil. It all looked modest, almost defiantly simple. But when, at the moment of signing the marriage register, her veil was removed, beneath the wreath was revealed a sparkling diadem, the York tiara, created by the jeweler Gerard especially for her. The symbolism of that moment was obvious. The girl entered the abbey as a commoner and left it as a duchess, crowned with jewels. The tiara sparkled with diamonds in the rigid geometry of classical design, highlighting the fiery hair of the newly made duchess. And it was not just a jewel, it became her personal symbol. Unlike Diana, who received a tiara from the Spencer collection and the legendary lover's knot from the Queen, Sarah received a piece created only for her. From that moment on, her name was forever linked with the York tiara. It was this diadem that accompanied her at dozens of festivities. During tours in Canada and Australia, at banquets and official receptions of the 1980s, the Duchess of York invariably appeared in her principal jewel. But this was only the beginning, because on her wedding day, she was presented with other treasures, no less remarkable and full of dramatic stories. On the same day Sarah received her tiara, Her mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth II, and the Duke of Edinburgh gave her another gift. It was a complete set, the so-called York Diamond Demi-Parure, created by Gerard. The set included a necklace, earrings, and a bracelet, a modern, brilliant suite worth about £250,000. At first, the jewels served a simple function, to emphasize the status of the Duchess of York and to accompany her at countless royal engagements. At official banquets, during tours in Canada, in Saudi Arabia, Sarah generously used the set. Sometimes she even wove the diamond bracelet into her hair, turning it into an extravagant adornment of her hairstyle. But the real sensation happened in 1996, just a few months before the divorce. Sarah arrived in the United States, where she was to attend a reception at the White House. With her came a suitcase of jewels. At the security check at Kennedy Airport, a fatal mistake occurred. The bag with the jewels was mistakenly checked in as luggage rather than carried on. What followed unfolded like the plot of a thriller. An ordinary teenager working as a baggage handler opened the suitcase and discovered the sparkling treasures. He took out the necklace and bracelet, hid some of the stones at his home, and left the bracelet in his locker at work. It seemed that the story of these jewels would end forever in the grim corners of New York. The scandal shook the press. The FBI intervened. The jewels were found, the thief arrested, but in the American press, sarcastic comments resounded. How could the Duchess have been so careless with a £500,000 set? The assistant director of the New York bureau himself remarked, "I wouldn't have taken that risk, but then again, I wouldn't be wearing $500,000 worth of jewelry." Nevertheless, the jewels returned to their owner, and although the divorce deprived Sarah of official status, the York Diamond Demi-Parure remained with her. Even years later, in 2011 and 2012, she wore it again at charity balls in London, proving that scandals may subside, but jewels continue to shine. Sarah Ferguson always stood out among other royal brides, not only for her character, but also for the gifts that accompanied her after the wedding. One of the most remarkable was the set she received from the Saudi royal family in 1986. It was not just jewelry, but an entire story wrapped in the symbolism of the East. The Saudi ruby suite included a necklace stylized like the curves of a serpent, with rubies and diamonds as well as earrings in the same design. The suite looked bold, even defiant, and strikingly different from the classical jewelry tradition of the British court. On Sarah, it made a special impression. The rubies burned against her red hair, creating an image passionate, strong, independent. This suite appeared not often, but each time it caused a sensation. Sarah wore it during her first royal tour of Canada in 1987, then at a gala performance at the Royal Opera House, and later at an official dinner in Australia. Each appearance was accompanied by enthusiastic commentary. The jewel was far too unusual to go unnoticed. And yet, the most mysterious aspect of this gift is its further fate. After the divorce, when most of Sarah's official duties were left behind, the suite disappeared from public view. Not a single photograph, not a single mention confirms that the Duchess ever wore it again. Since then, it has seemed to dissolve in time. Whether it remains today in Sarah's private collection, was sold, or passed on to her daughters remains a mystery. Thus, the ruby suite became something like an Eastern phantom in her biography, a bright symbol of the 1980s, of which today one can only speculate. Not all the jewels Sarah Ferguson wore belonged to her personally. Sometimes she was given access to those relics that were considered almost untouchable. One of such exceptional cases was her appearance with one of Queen Victoria's famous diamond bow brooches. The history of these brooches goes back to the mid-19th century. In 1858, Queen Victoria lost part of the family jewels as a result of a legal dispute with the Hanoverian dynasty. To compensate for the loss, Victoria commissioned Gerard to create 3 magnificent diamond bow brooches. For their creation, more than 500 stones from her personal collection were used. Since then, these brooches became not just ornaments, but a true symbol of the dynasty. After Victoria's death, the brooches were fixed in the status of royal regalia, passed down from monarch to monarch. They were worn by Queen Alexandra, Queen Mary, and later by the mother of Elizabeth II. Each of the owners had her own tradition. Some fastened the brooches to dresses or belts, others turned them into part of corsages or even hats, but the essence remained the same. These were jewels that never left the circle of royal authority. That is why it was such a surprise when in 1986, shortly after Sarah's wedding to Prince Andrew, Queen Elizabeth II entrusted her with one of these brooches. This happened during the Brommer Games in Scotland, and such a gesture looked more than mere courtesy. For Sarah, who had admired Queen Victoria since her youth, it was a true sign of trust. One can say that no other jewel so clearly symbolized the acceptance of the new Duchess into the royal family as this brooch. And although it returned to Elizabeth's collection, the very fact of its temporary transfer spoke louder than words. Sarah, despite her simplicity and scandalous reputation in the eyes of the court, for a time found herself among the chosen few. After the divorce in 1996, the fate of the York tiara became a mystery. For several more years, it appeared at official events. The most notable of these was the luxurious ball at Elton John's Windsor estate in the summer of 2001. Sarah appeared there in the sparkling diadem, and this was her last public appearance in such a symbolic crown. And then, silence. The jewel disappeared from view. Neither at the weddings of her daughters nor at state banquets was it seen. When Princess Eugenie married in 2018, she chose an emerald tiara from the Queen's collection, while Beatrice, in 2020, appeared in the legendary fringe tiara of Queen Mary, once beloved by Elizabeth. The York diadem, however, seemed to have dissolved. Rumors multiplied. Some said that Sarah had sold it to cover debts, since her financial troubles were widely discussed in the British press. Others insisted that the jewel had been quietly bought back by jewelers, or was being held in a bank vault. Still others supposed that the Queen herself had insisted the tiara should not appear in public again. Too many scandals were associated with her former daughter-in-law. The fact remained. For more than 20 years, the world did not see the chief jewel of the Duchess of York. It became something like a ghost, a symbol of the lost era of the 80s, which everyone thought buried forever. And yet, as so often happens with the treasures of the Windsors, the story turned out to be far more interesting than anyone might have supposed. More than 20 years passed. For admirers of royal jewels, the York tiara had become a true enigma, spoken of in whispers. Where is it? What happened to it? And would we ever see it again? The answer came unexpectedly, and not in Great Britain. In the summer of 2023 in Amman, the capital of Jordan, one of the most brilliant wedding ceremonies of the decade took place, the marriage of Crown Prince Hussein and Princess Rajwa. Among the guests were representatives of royal houses from around the world. And it was there that what had been awaited for decades occurred. Princess Beatrice, the elder daughter of Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew, appeared at the reception wearing the very York tiara. It was like a bolt from the blue. The tiara, thought lost, once again glittered under the camera flashes. Beatrice looked majestic. The diadem created for her mother almost 40 years earlier now gained a new life on the head of the next generation. The symbolism of the moment was stunning. The jewel, which had survived divorce, scandals, and long years of silence, returned not as a relic of the past, but as a sign of continuity. It showed that the York line, no matter how many difficulties it endured, continues its existence. For some viewers, it was only the beautiful return of an old tiara. For others, it was proof that even jewels are capable of telling stories of drama and rebirth. And if some diamonds fall into the hands of the FBI, while others vanish for decades, the York tiara proved one thing. In the world of royal jewels, there are no final points. Thus ended its shadow and began a new chapter. And for the audience, there remained only to decide which story seemed more incredible: the one where diamonds became the subject of an international investigation, or the one where the ghost of a tiara returned from oblivion at one of the most luxurious wedding banquets of modern times.